mentioned that this is the kind of the third piece I just want to hold consistently myself accountable for, and certainly we're looking at kind of our accountability as leaders in terms of how do we apply this. That I think I had mentioned in the previous video, sort of where does the rubber meet the road. So, two things I'll share with you, and then I will get to one more flip chart that just kind of outlines the three things that I think are really what's up for us in this content. And that is, there are two books I want to share with you that are great resources for this content that will give you a lot more. Either are great, that will give you a lot more under the guise of what we've been talking about. So one is actually called Primal Leadership, and it is authored by the gentleman I mentioned earlier, Daniel Goleman. And Daniel Goleman and Richard Boyatzis and Annie McKee. And they just talk more about that kind of triune brain and what essentially does it mean for us in a leadership capacity. And I think one of their key concepts, their key piece in, I think that underlies the book, and it's really kind of where things are, I think, for us in this content piece and in this class, is how much we have what is called an open limbic system. So I talked about the triune brain and just how those pieces connect and where we get triggered. The other piece is what they really share in the Science of the Primal Leadership book is that our brains are hardwired to interact with each other. Some of you might have heard this term, that our moods are contagious, and that's actually scientifically proven. So we've known it at some level for probably most of our lives, right? That when somebody's in a really good, playful, joyful mood, even if, especially if that mood is really sincere and powerful in a positive way, that it's kind of contagious to be around somebody in that state of mind. And we also know the converse is true, right? That if you've shown up to a meeting or an interaction with somebody and they're just really down in the dumps and it's pervasive, or there's a lot of negativity, right? Any of us who've served on a team where there's that person that we just find is somewhat chronically negative, and we've all seen it be the case that somehow that one person can really infect and affect the moods of others. That's what they're talking about in Primal Leadership. And I love, I'm just going to read kind of one thing from each of these books to give you a little sampling of an aspect of them. They say kind of around that idea of open limbic system, that as leaders, we need to be that much more responsible and aware of what is my state of mind and what is my mood and what portion of the brain is kind of in control right now, and how do I manage my emotional hijacking, as I referenced in that second video, how I just allowed my state of mind to kind of erode and corrode how I was even seeing and interpreting what my colleagues were saying, right? And how much that, I think, zapped my level of influence with my colleagues this morning in the meeting, right? And Bridget's going to talk more in a couple of videos to come about influence, and that was not my most influential moment this morning. So in Primal Leadership, they say this, that distress not only erodes mental abilities, but also makes people less emotionally intelligent. People who are upset have trouble reading emotions accurately in other people, decreasing the most basic skill needed for empathy, and as a result, impairing their social skills. So that one is kind of a connection between the stress statistics from earlier and just that recognition that when we are in a state of stress, we are less capable of having an empathic response, right? That we are then literally impacting relationships in a negative way. And they talk about more studies about how leaders have, that people's interactions with their leaders actually affected the rest of their day. So whatever their experience was with their boss literally set the tone for the rest of their day. So a lot of great things in that book. The other thing, more of just as kind of a soft story that I'll share with you from the other book I recommend, called Performing Under Pressure, by folks who are also steeped in the world of emotional intelligence and our brains under pressure. And the book is actually called Performing Under Pressure. And they're talking about that same concept, right, that kind of our emotional impact on others, that concept that mood is contagious. And they share a story about a gentleman named Thich Nhat Hanh, who is kind of a somewhat well-known Vietnamese monk. And he talks about, encouraging people to focus on how to become the calm person in the boat. So I'm sharing this story because this is what our final video is me sort of tasking us with thinking about your impact on others when you're in the boat with them. Thich Nhat Hanh, a peace activist who grew up in Vietnam and now lives in France, draws his metaphor from his country's history. His compatriots found themselves in horrendous conditions and decided to flee to Vietnam. Pandemonium ruled. Here is how Thich Nhat Hanh described those he called the boat people. In Vietnam, there are many people called boat people who leave the country in small boats. Often the boats are caught in rough seas or storms, and the people may panic and boats may sink. But if even one person aboard can remain calm, lucid, and knowing what to do and what not to do, he or she can help the boat survive. His or her expression, their face, voice, mood, communicates clarity and calmness, and people have trust in that person. They will listen to what he or she says. One such person can save the lives of many. So I'm inviting you between now and when we see you next and we do more of the kind of enrichment activities in class to apply a lot of this content, I'm really going to invite you to think about kind of three key things. First of all, are you the calm person in the boat? How do people experience you? And they go on in that section to say it's not about stifling emotions, because that is equally contagious and actually can be as problematic if I'm pretending I'm okay when I'm not, than being sort of haphazard in demonstrating emotion. So they're not saying stifle emotion. So what is your how are you in the boat? So three things then to be kind of responsible for and really thinking about in terms of your neuroscience, your stress response, and its impact on others. Number one, like I've said, this is really about intrapersonal management. Intra means within myself. How aware am I of this dynamic, and when I get triggered, and what kinds of moments of pause do I allow myself, and can I put a number on my stress response? And how am I aware of why that number is what it is? That's intrapersonal mastery, right? Such that I can have better personal management and mastery, so that then when I'm in dynamic with others, that open limbic system concept is where I want it to be. That I'm not pretending I'm not stressed, but I'm not operating completely out of stress and being, as I was in that meeting, fairly emotionally hijacked and just not having the influence or the impact on others that I want, right? And on myself. I also didn't feel good in that meeting this morning, right? And then the third thing that I haven't talked a whole lot about yet, but I think it's the bigger concept and links back to the statistics I talked about earlier in an earlier video, is what is then the culture I want to create, right? We create our culture. I think that there are companies that create entire work cultures around, wearing stress as a badge of honor, and that somehow works well under pressure means the higher stressed you are, the more important you are, and that ultimately that people then start to operate in this stress response all the time, thinking that they're much more effective and efficient, which I think is something that kind of Eric touched on in that way earlier, right? So be also thinking about what is the culture that we work within, and is that one that is going to kind of continue to support the pretty unpleasant statistics we saw earlier, or maybe shift the dynamic of those statistics?